The fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of trapped bees, casting a sterile glow over the grocery store's linoleum floor. An old woman stood at the checkout, her trembling hands clutching a small basket of fruit, oranges, apples, a single bruised pear as if they were treasures from a forgotten world. Her name was Eleanor, and the weight of her request would unravel a story no one in that store could have imagined. Eleanor's eyes, clouded with age but sharp with intent, met the cashier's. The young man, barely out of his teens, fumbled with the scanner, his name tag reading Josh. He barely glanced at her, his fingers moving mechanically over the items. "Double bag the fruit, please," Eleanor said, her voice soft but firm, like a whisper carried on a winter wind. Josh nodded, distracted, reaching for the flimsy plastic bags. He didn't ask why. Nobody ever did. But Eleanor had her reasons, ones that stretched back decades, through a life carved by loss and quiet resilience. The fruit wasn't just fruit. It was a ritual, a tether to a promise she'd made long ago, one she carried in the lines of her face and the ache in her bones. As Josh slid the apples into the first bag, Eleanor's mind drifted to a memory so vivid it felt like a wound reopening. She was 16, standing in an orchard under a sky bruised with twilight. Her father, a man of few words but endless warmth, handed her an apple, its skin warm from the sun. "Keep what matters close, Ellie," he'd said, his calloused hands steadying hers, "even when the world tries to take it." That was the summer before the war came, before the letters stopped, before the telegram arrived with words that burned her world to ash. Her father never came home, and the orchard was sold to pay debts. But Eleanor kept his words, and she kept the fruit always double-bagged, always protected, as if shielding them could shield the memory of him. The grocery store hummed with life around her. A mother scolded her toddler for grabbing a candy bar. An old man shuffled past with a cart full of canned soup. Eleanor stood still, her hands gripping the counter's edge. Josh, oblivious to the weight of her silence, scanned the pair. "This one's kind of beat up," he muttered, holding it up. "Want me to get you another?" "No," Eleanor said quickly, her voice catching. "That one's fine." Josh shrugged, but something in her tone made him pause, his eyes lingering on her for the first time. She looked away, her fingers brushing the canvas bag slung over her Shadera bag she'd sewn herself, patched over years, carrying the weight of her survival. Eleanor's life hadn't been kind. After her father's death, her mother sank into grief, leaving Eleanor to raise her younger brother, Tommy, in a world that seemed to grow colder by the day. She worked odd jobs: seamstress, cleaner, anything to keep them fed. Tommy, with his bright eyes and endless questions, was her light. She'd bring home bruised fruit from the market, the only treat they could afford, and they'd share it under a flickering bulb, laughing over sticky fingers. "Double bag it, Ellie," Tommy would tease, mimicking her habit of protecting their meager haul. "Can't let the good stuff break." But Tommy, too, was taken. A fever, swift and merciless, stole him at 12. Eleanor was 20 then, and the world went quiet. She stopped speaking for a year, her voice locked away with her grief. The canvas bag became her companion, carrying the fruit she still bought, still double-bagged, as if Tommy's laughter lingered in the crinkle of the plastic. Josh finished scanning, his hands moving to bag the fruit. "Double, right?" he asked, almost as an afterthought. Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. She didn't trust herself to speak. The store's noise faded, and she was back in that orchard, her father's voice echoing. Keep what matters close. She'd failed to keep him, failed to keep Tommy, but she could keep the Isher ritual, her promise. As Josh handed her the bags, a woman appeared beside Eleanor, her presence sudden and jarring. She was middle-aged, with sharp eyes and a clipboard, her name tag reading Manager. "Karen." "Ma'am, is everything okay?" Karen asked, her tone professional but edged with suspicion. Eleanor stiffened. She'd seen that look before, people assuming she was confused, frail, a burden. "I'm fine," Eleanor said, her voice steady now. "Just making sure the fruit's safe." Karen's brow furrowed, but before she could press, a crash echoed from aisle 7. A display of canned goods had toppled, and Karen hurried off, muttering about clumsy customers. Josh chuckled, breaking the tension. "Never a dull moment here," he said, handing Eleanor her receipt. She offered a small smile, her first in hours, and tucked the bags into her canvas tote. Outside, the evening air was crisp, biting at her knuckles as she walked home. The city buzzed around her, cars honking, lights flickering, but Eleanor moved through it like a ghost, her thoughts tangled in the past. The fruit, double-bagged, pressed against her side, a reminder of what she'd lost and what she still carried. She didn't notice the young man trailing her, his hoodie pulled low, his steps quiet but deliberate. The streetlights flickered as Eleanor shuffled along the cracked sidewalk, her canvas bag heavy with the weight of memory. The city's pulse thrummed around her, but she felt untethered, her world narrowing to the rhythm of her steps and the rustle of plastic bags. She didn't see the shadow behind her, the young man from the store, his eyes fixed on her slow, deliberate pace. Eleanor's apartment was a mile away, a small, cluttered space in a building that smelled of damp wood and regret. She'd lived there for 40 years, ever since she'd saved enough to leave the boarding house where she'd spent her 20s. The walls were papered with faded flowers, and every corner held relics of her Lithia cracked teacup from her mother, a photo of Tommy grinning with a half-eaten apple, a single letter from her father, its ink smudged by time. The fruit she bought was her offering to them, a quiet act of remembrance she performed without fail. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden tug at her bag. She spun, heart racing, to find the young man from the shadows now inches away, his hand gripping the canvas strap. "Give it up, lady," he growled, his voice low but unsteady, like he was convincing himself as much as her. His face was too young for the hardness in his eyes. Eleanor's breath caught, not from fear, but from recognition. She'd seen that look before, in Tommy's eyes when hunger made him desperate, when the world offered no mercy. "Let go," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. The young man hesitated, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Eleanor yanked the bag back, her strength surprising them both. "You don't want this," she said, softer now, her eyes searching his. "It's just fruit." He scoffed, but his hands dropped to his sides. "Fruit? You're risking it all for some damn apples." His voice cracked, betraying the bravado. Eleanor saw it, then the tremble in his jaw, the way his shoulders slumped under the weight of something heavier than hunger. She reached into her bag, pulled out an orange, and held it out. "Take it," she said, "but don't take what's mine." The young man stared, caught off guard. His name was Marcus, though Eleanor didn't know it yet. He was 19, running from a life that had chewed him up and spit him out, foster homes, empty promises, a sister he hadn't seen in years. He didn't take the orange, but he didn't run either. Instead, he stepped back, muttering, "You're crazy, old lady." But his eyes lingered on the fruit, on her steady hand, and something shifted in him. Eleanor turned and kept walking, her heart pounding, but her steps even. She didn't look back, but she felt Marcus's presence fade into the night. When she reached her building, she climbed the creaking stairs, her knees protesting with every step. Inside her apartment, she set the fruit on the kitchen table, carefully arranging the oranges, apples, and pear in a chipped ceramic bowl. She traced the pear's bruises with her finger, her mind drifting to Tommy's laughter, to her father's hands, to the promises she'd kept. The next day, Eleanor returned to the grocery store. The fluorescent lights still buzzed, the air still smelled of bleach and overripe bananas. Josh was at the register again, his smile a little warmer this time. "Back for more fruit?" he asked, scanning her small haul: 2 apples, a mango, another pear. "Double bag, right?" "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice steady. She didn't explain, and Josh didn't ask. But as he handed her the bags, he added, "You're my favorite customer, you know. Always know what you want." Eleanor blinked, surprised by the warmth in his words. She murmured a thank you and left, unaware that Marcus was watching from across the street, the orange still in his pocket, untouched. That evening, as Eleanor arranged her fruit at home, a knock startled her. She opened the door to find a girl, no older than 10, clutching a crumpled note. "My brother said to give you this," the girl said, her eyes wide and wary. Eleanor took the note, her hands trembling. It was from Marcus. "Sorry about last night. Didn't mean to scare you. My sister needs the fruit more than I do." Enclosed was the orange, unpeeled, its skin bright against the faded paper. Eleanor's breath caught. She looked at the girl, whose name she'd later learn was Lila, and saw Tommy in her eyes, hopeful, hungry, alive. Come in, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. Let's share it. Eleanor's kitchen glowed under the dim light of a single bulb, the chipped ceramic bowl now holding a new orange, its brightness a stark contrast to the faded linoleum. Lila sat at the table, her small hands folded, watching as Eleanor sliced the fruit with a precision born of years. The air was thick with the scent of citrus and unspoken questions, but for the first time in decades, Eleanor didn't feel alone. She handed Lila a wedge, her eyes softening as the girl took it hesitantly. Go on, Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm, like a grandmother coaxing a shy child. Lila bit into the orange, juice dripping down her chin, and a small smile broke through her guarded expression. Eleanor's heart ached not with grief, but with a flicker of something she'd thought long buried, hope. She hadn't shared fruit with anyone since Tommy, and the act felt like a bridge between her past and this fragile present. Lila didn't say much, but her presence filled the room. She was Marcus's sister, left in his care after their mother vanished into addiction. Eleanor learned this in bits and pieces, between bites of orange and Lila's quiet answers. Marcus tries, Lila said, her voice small. But he's always mad. Says the world's not fair. Eleanor nodded, understanding more than Lila could know. The world hadn't been fair to her either, but she'd learned to carry its weight. As Lila ate, Eleanor's thoughts wandered to the note Marcus had sent. His apology, scrawled in uneven handwriting, was a crack in the armor he wore. She wondered where he was now, if he was still out there in the cold, chasing shadows to survive. She wanted to help him, but she didn't know how. All she had was fruit, double-bagged, and a lifetime of keeping what mattered close. The next morning, Eleanor returned to the grocery store, her canvas bag slung over her shoulder. Josh greeted her with a grin. You're like clockwork, Ms. Eleanor, he said, scanning her usual haul apples, a grapefruit, another pear. She smiled faintly, surprised he'd remembered her name. Double bag it, she said, and Josh complied, his hands steady now, no longer fumbling. As he handed her the bags, he leaned in slightly. You okay? Saw you talking to that kid yesterday. Looked intense. Eleanor hesitated. She wasn't used to people noticing her, let alone caring. Just a misunderstanding, she said, tucking the bags into her tote. Josh nodded, but his eyes held a quiet concern that stayed with her as she left the store. Outside, the city was waking up, the streets buzzing with delivery trucks and hurried commuters. Eleanor didn't notice Marcus until he stepped out from an alley, his hoodie still pulled low. You gave my sister food, he said, his voice gruff but lacking the edge from before. Why? Eleanor studied him, seeing the boy beneath the anger. Because she was hungry, she said simply. Marcus shifted, uncomfortable, his hands stuffed in his pockets. I don't get you, he muttered. You're old, you got nothing, but you're out here acting like you owe the world something. Maybe I do, Eleanor said, her voice steady. Or maybe I just know what it's like to have nothing. She reached into her bag and pulled out the grapefruit, offering it to him. Marcus stared, then took it, his fingers brushing hers. Lila likes you, he said after a moment. Says you're not like other people. Eleanor's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him about Tommy, about the orchard, about the promises she'd kept through decades of loss. But instead, she said, bring her by again. I'll have more fruit. Marcus nodded, a flicker of something gratitude, maybe crossing his face before he turned and disappeared into the crowd. That evening, Eleanor sat at her table, the bowl of fruit glowing in the lamplight. She traced the pear's bruises, her fingers lingering on the imperfections. For the first time, she didn't feel the weight of her ritual as a burden. It was a gift, a way to reach out, to connect. She thought of Lila's smile, Marcus's hesitation, and the possibility of something new. But the city had its own plans. As Eleanor slept, a fire broke out in her building, sparked by faulty wiring in the walls. The flames spread quickly, devouring the faded wallpaper, the cracked teacup, the photo of Tommy. Eleanor woke to smoke and chaos, her only thought the canvas bag on her kitchen table. The smoke was thick, clawing at Eleanor's lungs as she stumbled through her apartment. The canvas bag was her anchor, its weight familiar in her trembling hands. She grabbed it, the double-bagged fruit still inside, and fled, her heart pounding not for herself but for the memories she carried. Outside, The night was alive with sirens and shouting. Neighbors huddled on the sidewalk, their faces lit by the orange glow of flames. Eleanor clutched her bag, her eyes scanning the crowd for Lila or Marcus, though she knew they wouldn't be there. The fire truck's wail drowned out her thoughts, but not the ache in her chest. Her home, her relics. Her past was burning, and all she had left was the fruit, double-bagged, a promise unbroken. A firefighter guided her to safety, his voice muffled by his mask. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked, his eyes kind but hurried. Eleanor nodded, though she wasn't sure. She sat on the curb, the canvas bag in her lap, watching as the flames devoured the only place she'd ever felt was hers. The photo of Tommy, the letter from her father gone. But the fruit, bruised and imperfect, was still hers to protect. Morning came, gray and heavy with ash. The building was a skeleton, its walls blackened and crumbling. Eleanor stood across the street, her bag still slung over her shoulder. Josh appeared beside her, his face smudged with soot. "Heard about the fire on the news," he said, his voice quiet. "Saw your address. Had to make sure you were okay." Eleanor blinked, startled by his presence. "You didn't have to come," she said, but her voice cracked, betraying her gratitude. Josh shrugged, his hands in his pockets. "You're my favorite customer, remember? Gotta look out for you." He hesitated, then added, "Got a place to stay?" She didn't. The shelter offered temporary beds, but Eleanor couldn't imagine sleeping among strangers, her bag unguarded. Before she could answer, a small figure darted through the crowd. Lila, her eyes wide with worry. "Eleanor," she cried, throwing her arms around her. Marcus followed, his face tense but softer than before. "Lila wouldn't stop talking about you," he said. "We saw the smoke from our place." Eleanor's heart lifted, a fragile warmth spreading through her. She knelt, ignoring the ache in her knees, and hugged Lila back. "I'm okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was reassuring. Marcus shifted, his eyes on the ruined building. "You got nowhere to go, do you?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Eleanor shook her head, her fingers tightening around the bag. Marcus exchanged a look with Lila, then sighed. "We got a couch. It's not much, but you helped my sister. I owe you." Eleanor stared, the weight of his words sinking in. She'd spent decades alone, carrying her grief in silence. But now, in the ashes of her old life, there was an offer of something new. She followed them to a small apartment, cramped but warm, filled with the chaos of life. Lila's drawings taped to the walls, a radio playing softly in the corner. Marcus set her bag on the table, and Lila insisted on arranging the fruit in a plastic bowl, mimicking Eleanor's ritual. "Double-bagged, right?" Lila said, her voice bright with pride. Eleanor smiled, her eyes stinging. That night, as Lila slept and Marcus sat quietly across the room, Eleanor told them about Tommy, about the orchard, about the promise she'd kept. Her voice was steady, the words spilling out like a river breaking free. Marcus listened, his hardness softening, and when she finished, he said, "You're stronger than I'll ever be." The days that followed were a blur of rebuilding. Josh checked in, bringing coffee and news of a new apartment through a store charity program. Marcus and Lila helped her move, their presence a quiet anchor. Eleanor still bought fruit, still double-bagged it, but now she shared it with them, the act no longer just a memory, but a bridge to a family she hadn't expected. On her first night in the new apartment, Eleanor set the ceramic bowl salvaged from the fire, cracked but wholly on the table. She placed an apple inside, its skin bruised but bright. The canvas bag hung on a hook by the door, ready for the next trip to the store. She wasn't alone anymore, and the fruit, double-bagged, carried not just her past, but her future.